we are off. You can begin talking if you wish.
Oh, are we going?
We are going. We're going. We're there.
Oh, I was waiting for the signal so I could play the copyright music just to get you like pinged.
Yep. Let's get the old YouTube gods down here to have a look at the channel. I'm really surprised that Games Workshop haven't just cease and desist us all yet, but like it is what it is. We had a little thing on the Exiled Backers Discord the other day where people were saying, what's the most toxic 40k podcast out there. We were mentioned once because we get too much hate and we don't deserve it. So I was like, oh, my proud little people. Let's pat them on the head.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. So this week's topic is, this is the Grimdark podcast, by the way. I know it will say 40k rants because my thumbnail guy hasn't gotten back to me yet with the new. I don't know how to do thumbnails. I'm not very good. I'm not very artistic, so I like to make them look nice. So, if it says 40k rants, that's why he's not gotten back to me yet. So, this week's topic is, on the Grimdark Therapy podcast, is it impossible to create the next Warhammer 40,000 killer? By that, I mean the next big game that's going to take a market share away from Games Workshop. At any rate, it doesn't have to be like 40k is gone now. It needs to just be a stable alternative that makes a lot of money for that publishing house or company or even person. Guys, what do you reckon? I'm gonna let you guys wax lyrical on this for a bit. What do you reckon? We've seen the rise of 3D printing start to eat away at the Games Workshop market share and what's going on in the hobby, right? We are at the very genesis of that. We're at the very start of that. 3D printing's been coming on in leaps and bounds, and I think now is the time where the quality of 3D prints at an affordable price is getting towards Games Workshop standard, which is great, which means people have alternatives. So we're starting to see the start of that journey. How far do you think we are away from another game coming along that starts to really chip away at that vast market share? I think the other day I equated it to, if you want a visual representation of what the market share of Games Workshop is like in the wargaming hobby, take Pepsi and Coke, combine them, and then annihilate Red Bull from the face of the earth. Now look at the soft drinks industry with that. That's what Games Workshop are like to the rest of the wargaming industry. They're vast. They basically are the industry, unfortunately. So how close do you think we are away from seeing that get chipped away at? Jump in whenever you like.
So I've had a long time to think about this because one of the most common defenses, criticisms, I'm not sure which I should say it is, that I've got on the channel over the years as well. If you think you can do better, create your own war game type thing. And it's just such a 1,000 feet away from the problem question. Because let's say I did that, right? If I wanted to get into competition with Coca-Cola, I could very easily. I could bring out my own soft drink, find a way to get cans and distribution, but I'm not a threat to them. I am not going to be producing in sufficient quantity to enough customers to dethrone them. I might not even get any interest from people just because I can set up creation and distribution of my product. And this is a reality for many businesses. In Games Workshop case, you have an established intellectual property that people have bought into over decades with tons of lore. You have celebrity ambassadors like Henry Cavill who have bought into the product as well. They're already out there. They're already the face of it. There is multiple IPs in the form of video games, in the form of, movies and television productions and YouTube shorts and hundreds of YouTubers with hundreds of thousands of subscribers. Good YouTubers, and then, bad ones like myself. And all of that exists out there. And it's like, that is such a juggernaut. You need something that has a similar level of intellectual property to come on if you want to dethrone that. The closest you might have come to that would have been the Star Wars X-Wing / Legion games. But the problem with those was that essentially Disney absolutely, is it early enough in the video to say swear words? They swear worded the entire Star Wars franchise. Ruined it completely with what they did with the movies, because whether or not you like them is relevant to the fact that you have to understand that they've been received pretty mixed reviews, we'll say, across the board. I think it's a very fair way to put it, even if you're pro those movies.
Mixed is overly
And so
fair,
yeah, so they've really tanked that intellectual property. But that was the only one I think that was within sort of, within a shot of doing it. Every other system doesn't have the celebrity support. It doesn't have a niche that it has carved out beyond those that are into that specific thing. Whereas Games Workshop is basically got a game that's targeted at, science fiction in the far future. They have some slightly more serious games. They've got the Lord of the Rings franchise. They've got fantasy games. They've got in the form of like Warhammer Fantasy. Then they've got like high fantasy in the form of Age of Sigmar. They've got skirmish battle systems. They've got, epic Legions Imperialis and Titans, and they've got a little something for everyone. They've even got bloody joy toys and candles and bed sheets and other merchandise. Like, the size of that juggernaut, I don't think it's a case of other people overtaking them unless they can bring something so amazingly transformative to the market, as it is a case of Games Workshop's own hubris tanking their company. So I know it was a very long start.
I think you're right. Like we are kind of relying on Games Workshop detonating their own ship, essentially. We are past that point now. You can actually swear, so everything's fine. But we are at that point where the market share is so vast. And do you know what? I think, again, we need to reframe the argument. I don't think anyone's saying that a Warhammer 40,000 killer, quote-unquote, has to compete with Games Workshop and knock them off their perch. I don't think that's what we're saying. I think what's more interesting, a question, is there a product out there that is viable to take some market share away from Games Workshop, right? You can do that without tanking the whole company and blasting them out the water and saying there's a new big boy in town, right? You can have, say, the World of Warcraft thing, right? You can have more than one MMORPG that's successful and makes money and takes market share away from World of Warcraft without killing World of Warcraft, right? It's a bit of a misnomer of a question, but it's an evocative one, which is why I wanted to put it on the thumbnail. Kaifa, what do you reckon? Do you reckon we're at any point close to another product, or do you think there's already one out there that we can say, okay, that's got a chance, that can do it?
It's a tough question. I'm trying to bring something novel to the conversation that we've had thus far, right? But I more or less agree with the points Maka has laid out. I wasn't going to speak on logistics that you touched on initially, Maka, but I think that is an important barrier and point to killing, right? 40K as the top dog. But my initial point on this was like, it's just an IP issue. I think the 40K IP is so dominant, essentially as how Maka laid out. It's going to be super difficult to compete. And I'll add to that point, I think 40K's IP, while some things like Star Wars are, at least before the Disney rebrand, were super strong as an IP that could, match and go kind of pound for pound against 40K. I still think 40K's IP is like almost perfectly suited. It's been designed for this purpose, to facilitate a kind of hobby space for you to create your own thing. Now, modern GW wants to kind of move away from creating your own stuff and that kind of heart of the hobby. But, you have all these different factions and sub-factions all nested within their own shtick, right? Their own thematic identity in a way that's game first. That's basically much more game first, and thus will create a stronger hobby kind of faction distribution than something like Star Wars would. I am inclined to believe that's the case. Just the way you can lean into different sub-factions in the lore, and even before 10th edition, you still would place factions and sub-factions, and you would have this strong hobby incentive to, oh, I'm going to play orcs. Well, what kind of orcs am I going to play? Well, I kind of like these sneaky ones, but I also like the speed wah, and then you have all these different ways you can skew your faction and kind of find a lane just for you. I suppose that kind of distribution of faction and identity could be applied to Star Wars, but I don't think that was the initial.
Yeah. I think
those initial identities were there.
Something that might be interesting for us to do as an exercise, right? Let's examine where are the blind spots in Games Workshop's approach to Warhammer 40,000 right now, right? What are they leaving behind? What are the crumbs and pieces of money that they're leaving behind on the table that they seemingly don't want to touch? Because Kiefer just brought up there the expression that you have when you play Warhammer 40,000, right? Your conversions. That is one big one, isn't it? Right, conversions. So
I think
go on.
What I was going to say was, I think if there is a hypothetical 40k killer, I think it needs to essentially provide that same kind of landscape for hobby enthusiasts to project their passion upon, right? You want to be able to really have that creative play space where you're like, oh, you want to be really cool if, like, I want my custom chapter or whatever the equivalent would be in this other IP. I want to have an identity and a theme that I could really lean into for my custom captain, right? The captain of my chapter, right? And then you kind of need that framework, I think.
That's true.
For an IP to dethrone 40k, because that, whether or not Games Workshop wants to support it, that's some of the most satisfying stuff that the hobby kind of provides to us as hobbyists.
I think Warboss Fits on the video on Tuesday this week. I need to get him on here, by the way, because I think you guys really dig him. He was talking about an article in White Dwarf back in the day that was literally build your own Space Marine chapter master, right? Giving you all the rules that you needed to play him and build him the way that you want to build him in the article, right? All you needed was that magazine and you're ready to go. You could build him. With the war gear and the special rules and stuff, that's something that they've really left on the table, Mako, do you reckon there's anywhere else that Games Workshop have just not dropped the ball? Because if they've made a conscious decision to move away from a certain aspect of the hobby, then we'll respect that. But is there somewhere else where Games Workshop have moved away, and that leaves like a chink in the armor for another publisher to kind of hit and say, okay, well, we're going to focus in on this and give the people what they want in that way?
Yeah, the biggest area for that is in their approach to communication. So most other manufacturers in the wargame space, when you engage with them, they are willing to take your critique and criticism on board, and they are very transparent about the processes they're going through when it comes to FAQs, errata, updates, roadmaps for what factions are coming, that sort of thing. Games Workshop's approach, in my opinion, is very, hey, you'll just buy whatever we fucking shit out down the pipeline whenever we feel like it, and you will be in suspense the whole time until we decide to give you some information. Until then, go fuck yourself and start saving up, cunt.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. It'd be really nice if you could have a little bit of foresight into what's coming down the pipe, so you can make your hobby investments like count, so you don't get screwed over by your own passion, right? But
people don't like having the rug pulled out from under them. People don't like having the rug pulled out from under them. And sometimes when they've just decided that they're going to go ahead with something anyway, they will do it even to the detriment of all involved. Take the Legions Imperialis release. Delayed, and they were insistent it had to get out regardless in that quarter. So they dropped it, and then literally the weekend that they said, yep, this is all on pre-order, they also announced, like the next day after those pre-orders went up, by the way, Old World is out in 1 month's time. You know, and they just dropped it like a hot turd onto people. And this was right before Christmas as well. This is in December. And people were just immediately like, wait, hang on, what? Because they obviously spent the money they'd saved for a game system, all the, the rush out, the hype, the FOMO, Legions Imperialis, because
The
people
nostalgia.
don't have good impulse control, and they dumped the cash on it, and then the very next day, the Sunday, they turned around and went, "Oh yeah, by the way, here this is coming as well." And then people, some people went and they cancelled their pre-orders. It just was a huge kerfuffle because it just completely took the wind out of the sails of Legions Imperialis, because that game should have had a couple of months for it to shine in the spotlight. And instead what happened was dropping the old world, it didn't get that chance. It was literally just pump and dump. It dropped because, well, the shareholders want it this quarter. It dropped, and then they went straight into the old world. And the old world, to its credit, is the only system to this date that actually has a logical, well laid out roadmap where you know what factions are coming when. Namely because they are just old factions and old molds being reused at 20-25 prices. But at least you know what's happening. Go to the Horus Heresy right now. Each Thursday, you'll see it in the comments. People just say, "I'm dreading what is coming." People they don't know what's coming, and when it comes, it usually fails. It's like the last few weeks we had an FAQ for Legions Imperialis. Was our last Thursday Heresy release. Well, I'm sorry, that's not a release. Prior to that was Tarantula Sentry Guns with a stat line and profile that I don't think every faction even gets. And the main weapon you would take on them, las cannons or heavy bolters, they didn't have as an option. It's just missile launchers. So it's just like repeated wet fart after wet fart. Like they have shit their pants completely when it comes to communications.
Here's a question,
and that's my point. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, just on before we leave this topic entirely, on the old world roadmap that you referred to earlier, did that include the cafe stuff, or is that a surprise?
I think they had it listed as like surprise reveal or surprise faction.
Yeah, redacted, whatever it was. Yeah.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay, cool. Just checking on the perception of that.
I just want to drill in on what Circle said there. He said, what was it? Having the rug pulled from under you, right? I want to expand on that, because there are multiple ways in which that can happen. One of the main ways is, of course, changing the rules, right? The rules changing a week, maybe even a couple of days after a codex comes out. The constant FAQs, even with the base standard rules that you get with the game. Is that somewhere where you guys think another company could say, here are the rules, they're going to stay the same, because we play tested them with employees that we pay to do so, right? Is that something is there another game out there that you've seen do that, where a stable game has come out, been completely fine, they haven't needed to update it, and does that game even exist under the umbrella of Games Workshop? Because sometimes they compete against themselves, don't they, in their teams and things?
Well, I've got 3 examples for that. First one is Leagues of Votan. That should speak for itself. I still think the apology they gave for the Leagues of Votan when they dropped that was just such a slap to the face, but others may say it differently.
Expand on that. Why do you think that? That's interesting.
So, when they dropped the Leagues of Votan, the rules were just broken as shit.
Yeah.
And so, therefore, the pre-sales had gone up. People bought them with the understanding that, hey, they were buying into the power play. Then Games Workshop, between the pre-orders and the actual launch day, decided to change the rules. So the people who were buying physical product, the physical product was already different to what they purchased. That's codexes, that's, the way the models now played. The entire investment was just a completely different thing to what they'd bought. And the way Games Workshop basically worded their apology was, we're sorry that you took offense at this. We're sorry that, you think this was unbalanced. It was just the way that they said it. You guys might feel very differently, but that's how I read into the apology.
I don't know. I literally think it was... I think I did a video on the time saying, should they even apologise? Because right now, all you're doing is basically admitting what you did and then saying, okay, well, we're sorry you feel that way. So, no, I'm sorry. The fact is, you fucked up. You fucking up and me being... That's not my fault. I'm annoyed. Do you know what I mean? I've been looking forward to this release for a long time, and you've screwed it. You basically... You didn't playtest this. You wanked this onto a page in a weekend and released it. You have no respect for your customers, and this shows it. And yeah, so I don't think it's controversial at all what you're saying at all.
So the second
not
example,
controversial. We'll be the Maca Defense Force on that front. This is crazy because I'm almost positive the perception of that release was super busted rules, and we had YouTubers and other people mention in the past that they do provide playtest feedback to Games Workshop, but Games Workshop doesn't listen.
They don't listen, yeah.
So what are we to assume other than Games Workshop is basically doing what they've always been doing, creating busted rules on release, and then making something very desirable for pre-order, and then claiming, oh, whoopsies, we didn't know it was this powerful. Here's a fact to bring it in line. Aren't we a good system at managing rules? Like it's so, and they're still doing it, right? Like look at the Elder, look at the Fire Dragons, and look at Osterman, right? Look at the Krieg grenade engineers with all their grenade abilities that were we could never foresee, and all these mortal wounds were too powerful, right? It's like, nah, they're just doing what they're normally doing, and it's terrible. And I guess just to bring things together, that's something another IP could do far better, and then create a nice landscape for product releases that don't feel as predatory with regards to how they allure people, right? Let's like with the rules always needing facts because it's just too powerful. We could never have predicted it.
No, I'm with you. Like it is like there is no excuse for what they're doing, and again, like we've seen this time and time again with Games Workshop. Like they will, and I think that's the point I want to drill in on is because Mac, you said you had 3 ones there that we want to get back to. I don't want to go too far off topic.
You're all right.
But are there other games that basically say, okay, here's the game, it's done. It's done. We play tested it, we've done it, everyone's at the studio is happy with it. And this is also a thing back in the day. The only thing that was keeping Games Workshop in check with this nonsense was the fact that without the internet, without apps to update and things like that, they had no choice but to release semi-working rules. Because what else can you do? Apart from release another book. And that means that you'll be accused of selling the solution to a problem that you created, which they couldn't do because people would just revolt en masse. So in the 90s and early noughties, they had no choice. The reason why people have the nostalgia goggles for 1st to 6th edition, and maybe even a bit of 7th, is because they had to release rules that worked on site. They were sometimes they were broken. There were certain things that didn't quite work, but there were always things that you could kind of forgive. Going, yeah, that slipped through the cracks. That's a bit silly, right? You know what I mean? Or 7th edition is when the slipping started. With the formations that were completely broken and things like that. But back in the day, Games Workshop were kept in check by the fact that when they released their rules, that was it. For the most part, they were out. They were in the wild, and that's it, right? These days, it's almost like the reins on the horse are gone, and it's running. It's gone, and they're just jerking stuff onto a page and releasing it out there. So Maka, what are the 3 ish examples of other games that you have ready there that maybe treat this in a better way than Games Workshop do?
Well, the second example I was going to give is another Games Workshop just gaslighting of the players, but a very simple and very time-relevant one. It's the drop pod. Because in the very article that they produced, they state, it's because there were contention over the footprint in the rules. Like, hey, I got an idea. How about you do your fucking job and write what the footprint of the model is, so then there is no contention in the rules.
Yeah, grey areas are the enemy. Yeah.
Am I wrong? Am I wrong?
No, that's completely reasonable. It's a weird way to frame it.
You could just say when the model is deployed, the footprint counts as what the doors would be when they're down. The doors do not stay up when the model is deployed on the table. Done. That's all they had to write in the drop pod's rules. Instead, they're like, there was contention for years, about what the model's footprint. Don't gaslight me. Just say you didn't want to produce the old model. It was complicated. It had more bits and more sprues. Now you can get the same number of sprues. You can fit 2 drop pods in the box. It saves the company money in production costs, and they make extra out of it. Like, just say that. I don't care, right? It's fine.
I think
where things are done well was what I was going to get into next by another company. So if you got anything to say on drop pod, well, feel free, shoot from the hip.
No. I was literally gonna do what you're about to do. so head off.
Yeah, no. So an example I will use is A Song of Ice and Fire. Michael, who writes the majority of that rule system, basically one writer writing the entire game. Great. Consistency. What he has as a principle, and he's spoken very openly about this, is he writes the game and essentially puts it out there knowing there may be some issues, but he does a lot of playtesting prior to sort of see what issues might arise along the way, as you should when you're developing a game system. Essentially, he releases 2 factions side by side at the same time, and that's the sort of format that they've gone down. So it's only having to look after 2 factions with, 6 to 8 units, something like that. Then he says, I will revisit these in 6 months or a year, depending on the situation, to see how the balance of the game actually is affected. Because if we react to the first feedback that comes in, we're probably going to get it wrong. Because it's going to be people haven't adjusted yet to what they're facing. They won't have come up with counters to it because it's a whole new thing that they're having to learn and adjust to the reality of. So you need to give it time, let it sit, see how it plays out, and then you come in and do your adjustments. And your adjustments shouldn't be done with a sledgehammer, where you completely rewrite something from the ground up. They should be coming in with a scalpel and going, okay, this one particular word in this spot caused a lot of grief. Let's excise that bit to change it. Not rewriting entire unit stat cards and completely changing the abilities of how a unit plays out. Turning a unit from a shooting unit, for example, into a close combat unit would be a complete change of how the unit works. So that's over with the Song of Ice and Fire, which is a cool mini or not game. And I think that is sort of my ideal.
Can I just react to something? It's so interesting what you were talking about, but there's one part that you said there, Maka, that really I want to get everyone's opinion on. You mentioned that the Song of Ice and Fire is made by one guy, one bloke, right? One cook in the kitchen. Games Workshop don't do that anymore. They write books by committee, right? Long gone are the days where we had a Rick Priestley or Andy Chambers leading the charge, leading the team, and his name is front and centre on the book, right? So Games Workshop now, every single book is by the Games Workshop studio. Hooray! It's in Lenton, Nottingham. Hurrah! And this maskless, faceless people who just write these books. Do you think that there is, and both of you, this is a question for both of you, do you think there is a serious sort of climb down in responsibility when we sort of say the team is writing this rather than one or two designers writing this?
Dude, oh, wait. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. Was not intending to make things more dramatic. Yeah, dude, that would be... I would love for there to be some authorship or ownership on who's putting forth the rules. And I've heard the defense of like, oh, well, when the rules are bad, they get undue hate and et cetera, et cetera. Like, yeah, that sucks, and people shouldn't be shitty for no reason. Like, feedback should be constructive, especially if there's some transparency with who's writing the rules, right?
Yeah.
And there's a certain amount of the population they'll just be dicks, regardless. All right, dicks and trolls. But I think it would behoove the rules writers to have some ownership over it, because then I think, yeah, there's like a shield. You have this amazing shield of like, you can do whatever you want and no one suffers blame, right? No one suffers credit either, but Games Workshop doesn't care because they only really want their numbers to be good at the end of the day, right? But from a rules point of view, like, man, like, it's annoying when you invest into a faction, right? With your passion, not just your money, and then you see them done so dirty by the rules. It would be refreshing to have, you know what, I didn't like such and such author's take on the last book, so I'm kind of looking forward to the feedback they've taken since the last one, right? Maybe we'll see if they've learned from that feedback they got from the last edition's codex, because it was so off base for what the faction needed, right? You could have that kind of conversation. But without ownership, there's no incentive. What do you guys think? Does that line up?
Yeah, absolutely.
With your sensibilities?
Yeah. Well, on a flip point to that, I would say, oh, we're getting too much hate for what we're bringing out. Then write better codexes. Then, just don't be shit at your job.
That's the solution.
If I put out a video, and Maka can attest to this more than us, because he's been doing this for longer, and two, you know what I mean. He's been lambasting his comments. If I put out a video,
it's a finish at this point.
Yeah, if I put out a video that is, and I've done this before, where I've had a take that's just shitty. Right, and I've even after I've uploaded the video, I've gone, do I re-record that? Because that was just a stupid take I had, and I let it go up, and I get all the hate, and I accept it, right? Because I was wrong, and I'm a moron, and my opinions change with time. But I leave it up there for posterity, going, look how much of an idiot I was. I'm going to take my rap on the wrist and get on with my day, right? You can't tell me that us on YouTube, and by the way, we are so exposed to our audiences, not literally, I mean, maybe literally, depends on what you pay me on Exile Fest, to be honest with you, but we're so exposed to our audience that that feedback is raw, and it's right there all the time. If you're working the Games Workshop in the studio and people are lambasting you online, you've got that huge insulation between you and the actual people who are out there, right? And nobody condones going after you and things like that, and doxing you and things, but you are a public person putting your name out there. That is how it is. There was something said by, I can't remember what Secret Service it was. It was somewhere in Macca's lot. I think it was New Zealand or Australia or somewhere around there. But it was, if you have to deny the action, it was a shitty action. Right? If you have to openly deny that it happened, then it was shitty. Right? If you're going in there straight away going, don't tell anyone we're doing this, maybe you should rethink what you're doing. Right? That's the whole thing that Games Workshop are doing. They're saying, no, we're not going to tell anybody who's writing anything, because... Why? Because you're preemptively, the rules you're going to do are lazy and shit, and you don't put any effort into them, right? If you have responsibility there, I would rather they took responsibility and said, listen, this guy poured his heart and soul into this, and he loves the hobby, and he got this one wrong. I think a lot of people in the hobby, people need to be given more credit. I think a lot of people in the hobby, there's always that vocal minority, but a lot of people in the hobby, Maka included, right, who can be quite harsh in Games Workshop sometimes, as we all can, will probably say, fair enough, you got this one wrong, fair enough. Do an FAQ, we'll sort it out, right? One FAQ. And let him do it. Let him do it. Let him write the FAQ. So it's all nice and balanced again. There's so much room for abuse when you have an entire team, a faceless team, that are just there writing quote-unquote rules. Again, once more for posterity, if you have to deny the action, then it's a shitty action, Maka, what do you reckon on what Kaifa was talking about there?
I would take it a step further, Kaifa, and go, this is the natural endpoint of removing the artist from the art. The Games Workshop model of the corporate people have decided this is what your faction needs. And I mean, look, in the video I put out literally today's recording, I show it hey, look, every faction gets a big boss, a lesser boss. You get your multi-pose, 3-pose Lord character. You get your support character, right? So you've got named big boss, named minor boss, main Lord, minor support Lord. Then it's an elite unit, and then 2 other kinds of unit. And that's basically a faction. And the Space Wolves release that's come out, and the Emperor's Children release, the World Eaters release, all of them follow this pattern. They're just the same cut and paste thing. And it's it has marketing's dirty, grubby fingers all over it. It doesn't have an artist's fingers over it. Because if you gave that to Alessio Cavator back in 2003, he would have gone, Rampage of Terminators and a berserk Cornate Dreadnought where the driver is just an insane bloodlusted, berserker. That has potential. Let's, write that into the book because that would just be fucking cool, right? And they would. Now it's no, you must have this unit. And look, we've already gone to the sculptors. They've already made it. It's already in production. Here's what it looks like. Come up with rules to it. And then the writers just, okay, whatever, right? And then they go, the writers of the rules probably go, oh, geez, this got feedback and it didn't go well there. We don't care. Doesn't matter. People buy it anyway. You don't need to sit there and tweak the rules. It doesn't matter, guys. Don't worry about it. Nobody's ever going to care. That is probably the fucking feedback that they're getting in the office. Because, again, marketing people are all over this, not artists. They're not writing it with the same drive and passion that, they probably go into the job having it, but it's just immediately bludgeoned out of them like they do with their store managers, because like, no, this is a big company. We sell products. This is our formula for sales. We have sales success. Therefore, the formula works. Do not deviate from the formula. You're employed to write, and this is the standard you're employed to write to. Like, that's just what it feels like.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right with how you laid it out. I think that the picture you've painted does line up with what we've experienced on the consumer side, right? And like, for the record, I don't even want to advocate for like it has to be one guy. You can still have the team. I just would like some transparency on like, oh, these two guys are working on the Eldar Codex this edition. Okay, so then you know who to give feedback to. They can do Q&As, they can write facts, and then you have just more transparency. And I think it's cowardly for Games Workshop to like not openly wear the responsibility of handling the rules that their consumers have bought into, right? Because it is, yes, I mentioned it earlier, there's a financial investment. If you want to be a Chaos Space Marine player, there's a financial investment you make, and a passion one, right? There's a little bit of emotion tied in there too, right? You've kind of identified with this faction, you've put some hours into laboring them out and realizing them on the tabletop, right? And I think naturally you're going to get fairly attached to them. So it would be good to know who's handling effectively, like, it sounds silly to frame it that way, but who's handling that investment on Games Workshop's part, right?
That's not silly.
Like, I've bought into Chaos Space Marines. Who's screwed me, basically, right? Like, is kind of how I would like to know.
Yeah.
A company cannot insulate itself from feedback. Games Workshop, though, has such a devoted, dare I use the word, simpish fan base at times, that they've managed to be very, like, their own community will go out and defend them. The company just says nothing. They just are hands off on communications, both good and bad. They'll just let the community defend them on their behalf, right? They got their white knights in bulk, which is a shame, because you look, every other industry at some point feels the repercussions for their actions and will take the feedback, no matter how grudgingly they take the feedback on board. Look at the video games industry. Like, they want to dictate to the players what they will like, and yet the amount of games that have just crashed and burned because they didn't do it versus the amount that have succeeded because they did, it's night and day. Same thing with movies and media, right? If you tank it, people, they'll just leave, right? If I was to have a restaurant and I serve bad food, you better believe I'm going to get bad reviews after the 5th case of salmonella that night. If I have a hotel room and you get in and you turn on the black light and you're like, how the fuck did that get on the ceiling? Right? It's probably going to show up in the reviews. Whereas with Games Workshop, it's this constant, like, self-policing fan base, and the company just covers their ears, and you might be able to rationalize and say, well, they can't please everybody, therefore they just don't listen to anybody, or some weird, like...
Terrible arguments, gotta get out of here.
Yeah, just an awful argument, right? But it's like, no, you're selling a product, you're trying to be the biggest and best in the world. Well, how are you ever going to achieve that if you don't get the appropriate feedback? Because at some point, the simps will stop paying the bills.
Well, I wonder how much of the defensive simpishness, let's call it, is just a byproduct of having no other alternatives, right? Because with those other examples you mentioned, movies and video games, I totally agree. Players will just pivot. But I think in the case of 40K or, whatever system you've invested into by Games Workshop, you're kind of committed to a degree. It's much harder, let's say, to say, you know what, fuck this, I'm going to sell my army and move into Star Wars or Song of Ice and Fire, right?
Well, people are screaming for alternates to Games Workshop that are Games Workshop. That's the difference between them and other companies in this space.
Yeah.
People don't go, oh, I'm not happy with Kings of War latest product, I'm going to go find something completely different, right? With Games Workshop, when people are sick, they are sick of specific things that Games Workshop has done. So they're like, you know what? I want to play one-page rules instead. Or I want to play Trench Crusade, because they're looking for that same feeling or an earlier edition, an older edition of the game. They go, you know what, I'm going to go back to the 8th edition 40k, I like that more. You know, that sort of thing. You hear that all the time with Games Workshop. You don't see that with other companies. You don't really see people going like, oh, I don't like this edition of Bolt Action, I'm going to go back and play the previous one. Most people are pretty happy.
Yeah, no, that's interesting.
It's a different mentality. People love the world of Warhammer. They just don't love Games Workshop. They just tolerate Games Workshop because it brings them the product.
Yeah,
that's the only way I can sort of describe it.
That is a really good jumping off point into the next example, and that is one-page rules. You know, it is something that is talked about a lot in terms of like alternatives to Games Workshop and people that could take a market share away from them. But one-page rules has two aspects. Number one is, you know, it's vast simplification of the rules. These are rules that hardly ever change because with less moving parts, there are less things to go wrong, right? It is a very elegant, streamlined system. As somebody who's played dozens and dozens of games of one-page rules, I can tell you, I don't think I've had one that I haven't enjoyed. Even when I've been against a player who maybe is playing for blood a little bit, I've not enjoyed a game of, a double negative there, I've not enjoyed a game of OPR yet. But the other part of their business model that I think is very interesting is their embracing of 3D printing. Of them saying, look, here's our files for you to 3D print, you know, but you can use your own. And they should look something like this for these factions that you're going to be playing as. Do you guys think that is somewhere where there's a blind spot almost that Games Workshop aren't even seeing, where companies can say, listen, oh wow, they're not doing 3D printing, they're still doing this, and it is antiquated, they're still doing this antiquated system of printing their own models, absorbing all of the costs for that. We don't need to do that. We can give you some STL files and let you have the cost of printing the models and the risk of doing so and things like that. Do you think there are any other companies apart from OPR that are doing that? And if so, what are the advantages of that kind of a system, do you reckon? Maybe this is a question for Maka first, or maybe no, Maka second, because your 3D printing's more of his thing. And Kaifa.
Yeah, I think Maka will have more to say on it.
I know you, but I know you also printed off some things in the past, or at least gotten a lot of things like that Lorgar model and things like that in the past. So you'll know what you're talking about as well.
Yeah. The Lorgar model is, well, it's from Artel. It's just a resin cast.
Yeah.
So that's not 3D printed, but yeah, I've definitely. I'm just lucky enough to have some people in my community that are into the 3D printing as a hobby, right? Like, we all know that's like a hobby in its own, basically. There's a learning curve there. So I've been lucky enough to have that sort of offloaded, and I can reap the benefits, give them some material cost, and we're Gucci. But yeah, on the front of like leaving stuff on the table and not embracing 3D printing the way One Page Rules has in their system, yeah, I think for sure that is an area where GW is not claiming that value. But I mean, it's like the old crocodile meme, right? Like, Games Workshop's this ancient successful creature that doesn't really need to evolve at the moment. There's no pressure, right? So until the environment changes, until their costs keep rising and 3D printing cost keeps lowering, I suspect they won't have any incentive to adapt their model.
Dude, that is such a good analogy. Like, that is a brilliant analogy. Like, that, yeah, it's literally that. They don't have to change, do they? They don't have to mold and evolve. Carry on, dude. That was brilliant, yeah.
Despite the disposition of my channel at times, like, I am optimistic by nature. It might not appear that way, but I swear it's true. And I think eventually, because of those two trends that I mentioned earlier, there will be a tipping point where Games Workshop probably will make some kind of pivot. It'll just be like, I don't know what the time scale is on like when players will be so fed up with GW's prices increasing because it's just so tough for them. Yet we have these quarterly reports that are like more successful than each passing quarter. Despite those increases and then the decreases in the technology cost of 3D printing, and maybe some innovations as well on that front that just make things easier, so the barrier to entry is also not as technical. Yeah, maybe Maka knows more about predicting the time scale there, but I think I'm optimistic eventually GW will have to make some kind of pivot. At the very least, the competition will force their prices lower, I would hope.
So when I look at the situation, a core difference between them is that when it comes to other game systems, there will always be people who are too tight-assed to go, you know what, I'm buying the legitimate product no matter how well the company has treated me, right?
Mm-hmm.
There will be people who
call
are
them
like, you know what?
suckers.
Yeah. There will also be people who, you know, will find any excuse to recast, 3D print, proxy, whatever, because they just don't want to pay anything. They're just super entitled, like, I'm entitled to a free product. That exists, sure. Games Workshop's a unique case where it's like, you've engendered zero loyalty. After everything, you can't, like, I got a petition of over 10,000 signatures in response to region-locked pricing. Didn't even get a response from the company. Not from any of the PR department, from any of the customer service departments, or obviously Kevin Roundtree, who the petition was addressed to. 10,000 signatures, right? A politician would respond to that.
Mm-hmm.
But not Games Workshop, right? They're too fucking special. So what loyalty do I have to that company when I look over at my 3D printer? Zip. Whereas a company that hasn't screwed me over, right, like A Song of Ice and Fire, I'm like, oh, okay, if I feel like buying something, I just will. Because you've earned that, right? I have no reason not to support the company. Yes, okay, there will be, like I said, the sociopaths out there who's like, fuck it, 3D print anyway, right? There will always be, but I would say that's a very small group of people, because humans are creatures of convenience. If you make something convenient, then even if it costs money, as long as it's not a gratuitous amount, people will just be like, oh, whatever, it's worth it in the long run. Good example of that is music piracy. Music piracy was huge, right? LimeWire, viruses on the parent's computer and all that in the early 2000s. But the minute you had things like Spotify come along where people could go like, for a reasonable price, or even for free if you're willing to tolerate ads, easily access music, it went away, more or less, right? Music piracy is so much lower than it was in the early 2000s because they made it convenient. Same thing with television. There was tons of piracy of of TV shows, things like Game of Thrones and that, because companies put these incredible paywalls in the way of getting to it. Like, oh, cable television is an excellent example of this. They go, oh, well, you need to buy such and such package. And it comes with all this other crap you don't want just to get to this show. People go, that is not convenient. That is not an effective use of my money. Therefore, I don't want it. But when streaming comes along and says, hey, you get access to all these shows and movies, you get our entire platform, you can share it with multiple members of your family that live in different households, then people went, okay, great, I'll take up streaming. That's fantastic. That is so convenient. And then all these streaming companies, they get greedy because there's now so many on the market, and they go, well, now we're going to put ads in on this paid service. Now we're going to restrict the number of family members you can share to in your households. And you know what people do? They just went back to piracy. So, you know, like, the consumer response, I think, is very predictable. And Games Workshop, from my perspective, it's like you've done everything you can so that when the time comes and people think they no longer need your services, because, and that day, in my opinion, is only 10 to 15 years away. And that's when you can walk up to your 3D printer, go, you know, Siri, you know, I want a Space Marine armed with bolt gun in this scale, use this as a reference. You know, and then the AI just generates it, goes, yep, printing now. And then 20 minutes later, it spits out an already cleaned with, you know, miniature out the bottom of the printer like a vending machine. When that day comes, and it's not that far away, they're screwed, because what have they done to retain the player base? Because they don't give a shit, right? They'll openly tell managers, North, you would know this. They openly tell you, they don't care about retention. They consider you a captive player base, captive audience. They are only concerned about getting new people in. The old people, no, they're hooked on our drug, right? They'll stay around.
It's recruitment. That was what we were told. In fact, I found the other day my old employee handbook. So I'm considering reading it out. I might not do because I might be able to get sued. But like, it's like so I've got two. There's a little black book which you get as a manager, right? As a manager, you get your little black book, and so the orange book, I think I can show the front of it. I can show the front of it without getting into too much trouble. But there's like the little, there's like an orange book with like the Comet of Sigmar on the front. So the employment handbook. Hooray, you've joined Games Workshop. And they tell you recruitment is the most important thing in the world. You know, blah, blah, blah. They don't mention, you know, old timers. They don't mention current people because they don't want to really rock the boat with somebody who may not be at the company for very long, right? You know, so they give you that. But when you get to Black Book, now they're like, okay, now that the casuals have left the room, here's how the sausage is made. You know, it's that little Black Book, and it's literally just like, you know, here's how being a manager works in Games Workshop. There's a lot of dark secrets in there, but one of the main ones is that, again, as Maka just said there, your current customer base aren't valuable, okay? Now, they say it in more flowery language than this. They don't just say, they're all dickheads. No, they don't do that, right? But they just say, no. Here's the thing. They're already here, right? And the strength of this is why we call it, you know, our world, your hobby, right? Or something similar. It's because the strength of our worlds that we have built means that once you're here, you're going to stay here. Even if you lapse from the hobby, you'll be back, right? We'll get your money eventually, you know? And it gives you this very famous analogy that I've used a bunch of times on the channel, the bucket analogy, right? Mac has heard me do this 50 times. He's fucking sick of hearing about it, I'm sure. But there's a bucket that is the hobby, and the water going into the bucket from the tap are people coming into the hobby. And the holes in the bottom of the bucket are people leaving the hobby, right? Instead of plugging up the holes at the bottom, because more are always going to appear, our job was to make sure we had a bigger tap year on year on year on year on year. That's what Games Workshop's approach was, right? Now, I didn't see why we couldn't do both and have loads of people in the hobby and say, you know, why are we losing people? Because of our prices, because of our really bad rule structure, because of our lack of communication, because of the mold lines and really bad looking models in 7th edition for most people, right? Really dated looking models, right? Really overpriced, really ridiculous. That's why we're losing people. Well, we don't want to rock the boat by tackling those things, because that would take effort and money, and it would make our shareholders nervous. So why don't we just ignore that and focus on recruitment? That's what they do, right? And again, what Mac is trying to say there is, and again, he did a much better job of articulating it than I will, but what it is that when this part of terminal velocity happens with 3D printing, I think that's what you're getting at, Maka, right? When we get into, it's like crossing the event horizon of the black hole, right? We're not there yet, but we can see it. When 3D printing is convenient enough that Joe Bloggs down the road can say, print me a Land Raider. And your 3D printer will say, cool, there's your Land Raider. Give me an hour. There's your Land Raider, right? You've got to clean it up a little bit, but there it is. Once we hit that terminal velocity, they are going to start squirming. And it's going to be so interesting. One of the main themes of my channel, at least, has been, what are they going to do when that day arrives? Are they even going to recognize it when it comes? Because I think there's an argument to be said.
Yeah, I think they'll recognize it. I think they'll recognise it, North, but I see two responses that can happen in there. The first is going to be them doubling down their existing practices, like, just raise the prices, right? And then when they realise that, we've hit the point where now the price rises have finally tipped it, because it's always on the teetering point. Back before 8th edition 40k, if it wasn't for Plastic Horus Heresy, they would have tipped over the point back then, where it's like the price rises can't continue because you're hemorrhaging players just slightly faster than you're able to up the prices to keep the revenue flowing in at the right rate. Right now, they seem like a real behemoth. But when they do realise, hang on, okay, we can't just keep upping the prices to continue those shareholder, like, we've actually got to start delivering value. That's the panic button steps in. That's when they're going to all of a sudden throw on the trick they've done before. We're the new Games Workshop. Right, they've done it in the past. Again, it was when they were in a bit of financial duress. That's what they will do. They will turn around to us and they will say, oh, no, like, we've always cared about community engagement. Like, look, this is such and such, our community manager. They're here to answer your questions online, you know? They'll try and put on this spin, this positive spin that, no, they've always cared.
Oh, I hate this. I hate this picture you're painting so much. It's so gross.
I feel that, like, that is what they would do. They would try and basically gaslight us, honey dick us, and say, no, we've always cared, you know, like, please don't abandon our product. Please don't just 3D print at home. Like, no, like, our rules, okay, we haven't done the best job in the past, but we assure you we're doing a great job now. These are the best rules ever, right? And they softly do this whenever they launch a new edition of the game. Every edition has these sort of ones. Like, it's the best edition of 40k ever. You know? Our best miniatures ever. The coolest miniatures ever, right? They always drop these
simplified but not simple, all that stuff.
Yeah. Streamline. And they'll do the same thing. They'll turn around and they'll just be like, "Oh no, we've listened to you. We've heard you. We understand."
They've heard us by fixing. They just left in the previous system. They just left the rot in 10th edition so that 11th edition can be positioned fucking with,
let me frame this.
Cute little bows, right?
I'm scared.
It hurts to think about. But the thing is, it's so slimy, and we've seen so many companies do this. Ubisoft is going through this right now because they are pretty fucked financially. Ubisoft is just being like, "No, we're forging ahead. This is what we're doing for Assassin's Creed,and blah blah blah."
Yeah,
just doing shit game after shit game after shit game. And now it's got to like the point where they're just absolutely like on the chopping block. All of a sudden, Ubisoft's like, "Hey, we got promo copies of the new Assassin's Creed. Like, we love our community so much. Like, you guys rock." Like, they're just, it's just the most like predictable. Like, the rat is backed into a corner.
Well, just
I
on
can
that,
100% see Games Workshop doing it.
They said on Ubisoft, and this is going to relate to Games Workshop. They said, "Oh, we had 2 million players on our first few days." And it's like, yeah, okay, that's not sales because you have your own subscription service. So let's just throw that one out. And number two, things like Manor Lords had more than that in that time frame. You know what I mean? And it was only released on Steam, not on consoles as well. That game flopped and flopped hard, and we will see in the next couple of months just how much it flopped. And I think they're trying to,
Speaking of that lying, I actually had a chat with Arch about this because we talk occasionally off air.
Yeah.
Just because we don't record together, it doesn't mean we don't talk. And I said, this is bullshit, right? Because they claim they had 2 million players, and I know this is tangential to the main topic, but it's very interesting because again, scummy behaviour and lying about sales it's
transversable.
Yeah. Lying through a mission is very still lying, right? So, in order to claim 2 million players, Assassin's Creed Shadows need to have sold at least 540,000 copies on Steam to make up 27% of its sales. So it said 27% of its players were on Steam, right? And yet the all-time player count for Steam for Assassin's Creed Shadows is 60,000.
Yeah.
So unless it was 27% of their players...
Yeah, unless they're not playing it. I'm going to buy this $90 game for... I'm going to sit there and not play it. For 400,000
so 27% of their players are on Steam. It actually works out to being the total number of sales is actually 227,000. So just some quick maths I did because they openly gave us the information to dissect. They said, "Oh, Steam is where we had the most sales. We had 27% of our sales on Steam. Also, we have 2 million people in the game." It's like, okay, well, let's go to Steam. How many all-time player count? Oh, 60,000. Oh, well, that's not 27% of 2 million, is it?
I mean, we're never given numbers, are we, by Games Workshop on what they sell and when. Do you know what I mean? But, I can honestly see Ubisoft are 10 years further down the road of where Games Workshop are headed if 3D printing picks up in the way I think it's going to. I don't even think it's a think anymore. I think it's not a theory. It's a countdown, right, with 3D printing. The models that I've seen, and I get sent to my house from Minimaker and things like that, it's now a countdown. This is not up for debate. It just isn't. 3D printing will tear their arse out eventually.
The quality's already at parity.
It will undercut them.
Well, Games Workshop themselves 3D print their masters, and they're half the ones you see in the showcases on Warhammer Community, the 3D prints. You see the bloody layer lines.
Yeah. I mean, and here's the other thing. We say this every single episode. Nobody wants Games Workshop to succeed more than us, but we want them to succeed as customer advocates. In the right way. Giving the people what they want. Being the company that, guys like Rick Priestley and Andy Chambers and Jess Goodwin, guys that used to work for, the passion that was in there for wargaming and creating cool things, Bolt action we haven't even
Hell
talked about.
yeah.
But that's another game that really, here are the rules, guys. Alright, you're going to update them? No, because they fucking work at the box. You paid your money. They work. There you go, you know? Don't get me wrong, there are other additions that happen. And there's an errata every now and again, every year or two. You know, oh, that's a bit odd. We'll correct that, right? But you're not looking at every week, you know? Yeah, the Germans aren't getting updated every single week because they're overpowered or their grenade isn't working properly. Because they make the fucking rules work out the box. Because you paid your hard-earned money. You respect your customers. You say thank you. Thank you for buying. This is the one thing that I don't get about Games Workshop. When I brought out Revenant, which is a really shitty RPG that I wrote, right? Everybody who bought it, and there were a couple of hundred people who bought it, and I emailed everyone saying thank you, right? Don't get me wrong, I'd copy and paste bits of the email because, you know, you'd be there forever. But everybody got an email saying thank you so much because I value, you spent money on something that I created. Holy shit. I'm so thankful for that. And other companies like your Warlord Games and your OPR and folks like that, the CMON, you know, they all value your business and it's a tangible feeling. Like, these guys really value my money, and if I email them and ask for something, do you know what? They might just send me a sprue saying, oh, that was missing, here you go, right? And that kind of a thing. Games Workshop don't give a shit about you retaining you. They don't, because they know that they've got you by their nose hairs. Because 40k, and I will die on this hill, is one of the best IPs on planet Earth. It's brilliant. Like, every part of it is cool as fuck. It's a male power fantasy on steroids in space, and you can make it as grimdark as you want, and it's absolutely fantastic. But they dine out on that, and they don't respect your time, and they don't respect your loyalty. You know, they respect their bottom line, and they don't need you. They don't. That's the problem. They don't need you. That's why the market share is up for grabs. It really is. And I wanted to work towards this video talking about 3D printing, because I think it is the big thing on the horizon. If you're looking at taking a market share away from Games Workshop, as Mac has said before, really good point, nobody's doing a better job of fucking this up than Games Workshop are themselves. It's not going to be a case of another company coming in and saying, we're beating you at your own game. It'll be Games Workshop not rolling with the punches. And they will see 3D printing. They'll be extremely arrogant about it. They will assume everybody will just play ball with them and continue buying the overpriced models that you know, and it'll kick them in the arse.
Yeah, I think it'll just take someone with a marginally comparable IP. I think that's all it'll take. As long as there's enough of a groundwork in that IP to kind of create your own dudes, and if it has an already existing market share, like something like Star Wars, again, would have been perfect.
I mean, can you imagine an OPR?
But there are other IPs up there.
Like an OPR or Warlord Games or even CMON getting a hold of the Star Wars license? Like, that would be... that's danger. That's warning signs. If something like that happens, then, yeah, that is alarm bells in Lent and Nottingham going off, if they know what they're doing.
There is also something to, like you mentioned it briefly, the frequency of rules updates, right? And this is just an idea. I want to pass it to you guys and see what you guys reckon. But like we make this point, it's like, rules are updating too often, 40 noxious. But I get the feeling that the news cycle rules update creates positive momentum for 40k and Games Workshop in general, right? I think it creates this atmosphere of things are happening. It's interesting. There's something to talk about. New rules are changing. Points are being adjusted, right? New factions are coming out. There's always something in the news cycle for 40k, right? And like their Warhammer community site is, I guess, a perfect example of this, right? So I wonder if actually what we're pointing out as like a negative is actually something positive in terms of that it serves Games Workshop's ends, right? I think that's probably true. Unless you guys feel, I don't know. You can tell me if you feel otherwise.
I mean, usually when those balance fixes happen, very rare that it turns things that are completely unplayable into playable. It's usually just a nerf. Mm-hmm. That's what a lot of their balances are. So that leaves a bad taste in people's mouth, right? Because they want to adjust factions to sit into that sort of happy point where it's like you're not winning too high a percentage of events, blah 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 blah, right?
Yeah, that's their
what
metric.
that's the way that they operate. And it's like, well, if you got it right in the first place with your rules, and you only had minor quibbles that needed fixing, and you did those in a timely manner, people would love it, right? It would be considered a net positive.
Oh,
The
I'm
problem
with
is
you.
you get two approaches though. You get the Horus Heresy, just 2 years, no fucking FAQs, and everyone's screaming for it, and the company's just like, no, we're thinking maybe new edition, like, and we'll sell you the solution to the problem that we created. Or you get a 40k where it's like, yeah, we know we created a problem, but well, look, this army, it's run its course, you know, it's too powerful. We've got to sell you the next thing, so let's do a bit of a do-over here. Let's tone down the power. By the way, did you see the next codex coming? Yeah, look, would you look at that? I have one right here. Did you see that? That looks pretty powerful. Do you want to buy one? I think you do. Look, we bought back a classic John Blanche artwork. Realizes a real miniature.
Look at
We know
this.
that gets you.
Gross nostalgia baiting tactics.
Yeah.
No, I agree with what you're laying out there. I just wonder if the normies actually perceive like news, you know, articles on various competitive outlets. Like I can't help but feel that the normies are kind of looking at rules changes and updates as something like positive. Whereas our kind of disposition is like, oh, it's annoying, it's negative, right? Why can't the rules just exist and have the game be functional from the jump? I get the impression, at least in my sample size of a community, that people perceive those updates that we just see as negative as something like good. Maybe even for some, a marker of good game health, right? I could easily see that being perceived that way.
Depends
Right.
who's doing that recognition though. Like when you say normies, what kind of group are you really referring to? Because
the people who enjoy. So like I feel pretty confident in the position that I am more into the 40k space than you guys are, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in my
definitely.
local play group, there's a greater majority of players, I would say, who follow competitive hype cycles and news and, you know, water cooler talk, to use that kind of like framing around these kinds of like rules updates and shifts and moves in the rules, but do not go to competitive events at all themselves, right? They just stay in their local pool, you know, the local gaming store and play and maybe try and build TT lists or whatever, right? Or maybe not. But a lot of people seem to just enjoy the news cycle of the people in the hobby, right? Even though they don't go to those events and deal with these like competitive lists and metas or tournaments or whatever. That's what I mean by normies. Like I think they're people who just enjoying that 40k has a news cycle, period. Even if it is just competitive like adjustments and points.
Well, that group's always going to be satisfied. So,
that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So I hate to be Games Workshop about this, but it's like opinion discarded because like I could serve up slop on a plate, and that group of people will just go, "Yep, cool. This is great. It's fantastic because it's a hobby I enjoy, and I've, you know, that's it. There's no critical thought required because to do so undermines my enjoyment." Okay. In which case, like, it doesn't matter whether it's positive news or bad news. Like, it's just news, right? So it's good as far as they're concerned. So it doesn't really matter. It really matters for your competitive people and the people who are into like the actual gameplays and enjoying it as a fun game. Because if you enjoy it as a fun game and you want to feel like your faction is equally as valuable as any other faction, then it's really disheartening. But on the other hand, if you're one of those people that's, you know, playing from a tournament perspective, well, your only investment in that faction is that, like, well, it wins me games, and I feel like a big man when I beat little kids with my toys. Like, you know, I'm grossly teasing that community, obviously. They're not all like that. I myself once played 40k tournaments. But, you know, so in those situations, it really only affects the narrative player. The narrative player who wants his faction to be equally as valuable as the next is the one who ultimately suffers, especially if he has a long-term love of said faction. He is the one who suffers the negative fallout. Tournament players, like I say, completely indifferent. You might annoy them if they've just finished building the army and you've just sort of told them like, oh, actually, you know, this whole army that you've just spent some money on and literally just hit with white base coat and contrast painted in 22 minutes is now invalidated. They're like, oh, shucks, now I've got to move on to the next thing. Like, they might be a little bit inconvenienced, I guess.
Yeah, but that's the hustle they're signing up for. That's their
thing,
they're not
right?
too perturbed by it, I don't think.
No, so I don't think in the end, it really does much for the news cycle. And look, if you look on Warhammer community, the news cycle is really just, here is new thing coming out. Thing has been released, discard thing, wipe all fucking history of it from the internet. Here is new thing. Get excited for next product.
Oh, yeah, it's the worst.
Yeah, so I think overall, keeping it in the news cycle, I know it's a long-winded way of saying it, is just, does nothing.
Well, I think we've
fair enough.
I think we've covered the question, man. I think this is a nice, neat, surgical, hour-long exploration in, you know, what would it look like if another game came along and wanted to take market share away from Games Workshop. I'm not going to call a video that because, you know, that would be silly. But cheers.
Not very catchy.
Who is next on the docket for Grimdark Therapy? Who is next?
I am.
Ooh. Do you have any?
I don't have a topic in. Like, I kind of, if we can, I like the idea of making things topical, but it's not always conducive with what the news is for Games Workshop.
Sure.
But I do like what you suggested here, North.
Oh, the
maybe we'll.
Yeah. You can take it if you want. You can preview that. If you want.
Yeah. This idea, you know, like our own take on like what we would do to Games Workshop if they were under our reins. Like that's a fun fantasy to to play with. Right?
I think so. The way I wrote it was Grimdark Therapy now owns Games Workshop. What do the next 10 years look like?
Yeah, that's a great title.
I think like if you go into like on the day you do we record the podcast, like we look at the state of Games Workshop on that day together. Like we literally look at their stock price, look at everything. Like, okay, if we own this company and we want to make more money, what do we do? You know, we can't just do like we can't play to the gallery, lower the prices. Well, no, we want to make money, right? So what do we do? I think that'd be really interesting. Or do it the other way. I don't know. Whatever you want to do with it. But I think it'd be really cool to get a perspective on.
Because I like how you laid it out. I think it'll make for an entertaining exercise at the very least, right?
Absolutely. I think a lot of us are we have the really cool dynamic of this podcast is that we all have different skill sets, you know, and different areas where we're stronger than others, and I think we all cover each other's weaknesses quite well. But that also means in a topic like that, you know, we will get differing opinions, which would be pretty cool. We want to go in different directions. Like I'm like more artistic and want to go like, hey, let's give it all away for free. That kind of a thing. Fuck the shareholders.
I think it'll be a good episode. Honestly. Yeah, that's fun. Good topic.
All right, guys. Well, thank you very much to Outer Circle and Kaifer from the 40k for turning up to this one. Their channels will be in the description down below, guys. What's coming up on your channels? I know Outer Circle's had a new video today, so he's probably taking a quick break. But what's going on? What's going on?
I am planning to do another little painting stream on that Artel counts as Lorgar model, which should be it should be fun, should be chill. A little bit of a stream later it'll probably be out, but it'll be out regardless by the time this video gets published, I think. That's safe to say.
This is going up on Thursday.
Beyond that, I've been doing some community spotlights, looking at homebrew rules, which is fun, and I've posted a few shorts of some converted Tyranids I'm doing. So it's a fun, hobby-centric content, really.
Nice. Mackie, you there?
Yeah, no, I just didn't want to interrupt.
Oh, okay.
So for me, no, I did pop a picture though of the drop pod in the chat, which has them like in black and white saying like, "Oh, it gets rid of all those fiddly arguments." It's just I like to bring some receipts when I make statements.
Mhm.
But yeah, no, the whole thing with us at the moment is I'm just going with what the vibes on that day. Nothing more exciting than that. I do want to do a part 3 of my vertical slice series, like looking at legions and going like, well, hey, here's a theme. Here's like how you can expand on like a 1 sentence bit of fluff and turn that into an actual theme that's really fun for your army to give it some distinctiveness and to do something unorthodox that people might not think of when they look at that faction. I think that's a really fun thing to explore, and it's one of the things that I love most about the hobby, when you get like that one line of fluff that just inspires a whole, like, now I want to build this. That's a great feeling, because then
Mhm.
when you do that, you end up with a unique force and you're at an event or whatever. You'll get people flocking over to you, just be like, hey, what the hell is this? Like, tell me. And that's a feels good. It's a feels good moment, right?
Yeah,
So,
that's the real Warhammer community, right? Those kind of moments.
yeah,
Absolutely.
and people, if you do it right, they'll be inspired and they'll copy you. They'll see a conversion you did or something like that, and then
Mhm.
it's like a, hey, I've had an impact here. People like what I did. So that's they're the good things, the good vibes you get out of the hobby. So yeah, I want to do
Absolutely.
part 3 in that series.
Good
Yeah, I enjoyed
vibes.
the previous videos you made in that series. They're good stuff.
Yeah.
Wholesome.
Alrighty. I guess
Still
that
get disliked.
it wouldn't be YouTube if
Crazy.
you didn't, man. It wouldn't be YouTube if you didn't. Alrighty.
That's the funniest part.
At this point, haters just want to hate. That's all that is.
Let
Well,
'em-
take the free engagement. That's fine.
Yeah, you don't realise, if you give us dislikes and comments, doesn't matter. YouTube just sees it as a positive. Just saying. I've always said it. You need better things to do with your time. If you give a random negative comment on a video about toy soldiers, you need to reassess your life. Just saying. All right, cool. We'll leave you that bombshell. All right. Thank you very much, guys, and we'll see you guys on the next Grimdark Therapy. And I will be seeing you. When's this? Thursday? Tomorrow for some more Hobby Nightmares. All right. See you then. Bye now.
Catch you later.